I want to thank you for joining us and viewing this episode in the Meet the Professor series. In this special segment, we are featuring Dr. Katie Caprino. Dr. Caprino serves the college as Assistant Professor of Education in the School of Human and Health Professions here at Etown. Dr. Caprino, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin. I'm really excited.
Us too, Katie. Before we begin, I would like to share a little bit about Dr. Caprino with you. Dr. Caprino teaches adolescent and children's literature, literacy methods, educational foundations, and linguistic and cultural diversity courses. Her research areas include technology integration in literacy classroom, children's and young adult literature, English education, adolescent literacy, and the teaching of writing. Prior to earning her doctorate at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Dr. Caprino taught middle school and high school English in Virginia and North Carolina. She has taught first-year composition at Durham Technical Community College and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Before joining the faculty at Elizabethtown College, she co-coordinated the English education program at the University of Florida. And currently, she lives in Lancaster County with her husband and little boy. Today, which we're really excited about, Dr. Caprino will be talking about her recent published text, Inquiry-Based Literature Instruction in the 6th through 12th Classroom, a hands-on guide for deeper learning, that was published in 2021. And then she also will be giving us an introduction about her upcoming work that hasn't quite been published. It's not published yet, right, Katie?
Right, not yet. Coming out
And that's titled Student-Centered Literacy Assessment in the 6th through 12th Classroom, an Asset-Based Approach. So Katie, without any further delay, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
All right, good. Well, thank you, Caitlin, and welcome to all the alums out there at Elizabethtown. I wanted to talk about a couple of things with everyone today. Before I get to the books, the first thing I wanted to talk about is a program here in our department called Jay Reconnect. And this is a program where we bring recent graduates of our education unit together via Zoom a couple of times a year. And this gives graduates an opportunity to sort of have a familiar place with familiar people, with people who've been trained in similar ways, to talk about how life in the classroom is going. For those of you who are in education, we know that the first couple of years of teaching can be challenging and taxing, exhausting, and rewarding. And so what Jay Reconnect does is provide a space for graduates to come together and share how it's going in the classroom, and then also share some things that maybe aren't going as well that you want some opinions on, some feedback on. Sometimes brand new teachers can be a little bit reticent to share when things aren't going well with their building supervisors or assigned mentors. And so Jay Reconnect gives everyone sort of a safe space to come together with other graduates and with me to sort of talk about the state of the classroom, if you will. And so people go around and we share how things are going and what you might want advice on. And then we go around and sort of give, well, if I was in that situation, here's what I might try. Or have you looked at this resource? This has really helped me. Or this is a great book that we're doing and reading, and maybe you would like to read it too. It gave me a lot of ideas for this. And so, and I also share things that are going really well in my teaching here at Etown, and things and questions that I have. And so I find it to be really transactional, and we learn from each other, and I learn about the great things that alums are doing in their classrooms and things that I say, gosh, maybe I could insert this into my courses. So that's a really great thing I think that we have going at Etown is our Jay Reconnect program. It is started at the University of Washington by a colleague that I had at Chapel Hill. So it's not my original idea, but it's definitely adapted and been molded, and is something that I'm proud of here at Elizabethtown College for our graduates. So if you are an alum and you're not a part of it and you're in the classroom, please reach out to me. We'd love to have you. Yeah, and so the other thing that Caitlin wanted me to talk about are my two books that I've done with Sean Ruday, who's a wonderful colleague at Longwood University in my home state of Virginia. And so the first one is Inquiry-Based Instruction, Inquiry-Based Literacy Instruction. Wait, You're going to record this, aren't you? It's called Inquiry-Based Literature Instruction in the 612 Classroom, a hands-on guide for deeper learning. And so this came about a couple of years ago. I found Sean on Twitter. So we hadn't met before we started this book together. So there's some props to new literacies, which I study, and how people can make really meaningful connections in online spaces. And so what we do in this book is we articulate a way in a practical manner for teachers who are teaching English in grades 6 through 12 to incorporate inquiry into their classroom. So the first thing that we discuss in our book is, what is inquiry-based literature instruction? Why is inquiry so important? Why is it so important for teachers and students to work together to try to answer really big questions that matter? So sometimes I talk to my students about this, you'll look on the board and you'll see the essential question is, what is a dividend? Or, what is a metaphor? And it's not that those questions aren't important, but we don't spend our adult lives really wrestling with those ideas, right? Whereas the question about what is a friend, or what is hope, or what does it mean to support others? Those are questions that really matter. And we can return to them, and their answers become more nuanced as we advance in our lives. And so we really wanted to make sure that teachers had a firm foundation in what is inquiry, what does inquiry look like. So we spend a lot of time thinking about helping our readers define essential questions, because if we want our students to engage in meaningful inquiry, we have to give them questions that matter, right? And so we rely on some other thinkers, McTee and Wiggins in 2013, who give sort of a list of qualities that essential questions have. And those include being open-ended, like what is hope, right? There's no yes or no answer. There's no one-word answer for those questions. Thought-provoking. They call for higher order thinking. They point toward transferable, important ideas. They raise questions themselves. They advance future inquiry, and they can be revised over and over again. And your answer can become revised over and over again. So after we sort of set the tone for what is inquiry, why is it important, how is it really helping students think about their world and their place in it, and after we've given teachers ideas about how to set up essential questions that matter, we then sort of give, in the middle part of the book, practical vignettes of classroom applications of inquiry, right? So one of the great things about Sean, he's a great colleague, and he has really great access to schools in Virginia. And so he goes in and applies our ideas in the classroom, and then shares those vignettes in our middle chapters. And so what we do in the book is provide teachers with 3 different ways that inquiry can look, right? Because we acknowledge that for some teachers, teaching with an inquiry stance is very new, right? It's very new, and we're not sure people's familiarity. So there are 3 units that are set up. In the first unit, the teacher creates the question and the texts that students are going to answer that question with, right? So, okay, class, we're going to look at what is friendship. And I've picked a lot of different texts, a novel that we're going to all read together. I've picked a song we're going to look at, a poem to look at, a painting to look at. I, as the teacher, have picked both the question and the texts that we're going to look at to answer that question. So that's sort of unit 1, one exemplar of the way you can start with inquiry in your classroom. The next chapter in this sort of practical vignette section is where the teacher chooses the question. So the teacher still may say, what is hope? But the students begin to bring in some of their texts as well, right? So the teacher's creating the original question. They may select a class-wide text to read together with students, but students are beginning now to bring in some of their texts to answer that question. So they may bring in the lyrics of a song. They may bring in a podcast that they've listened to. They may bring in a historical document that answers that question, right? And then we give the third sort of example. And this is where the students both create the question and create all the texts that help them answer the question. So what we try to do for teachers and for students is scaffold them both into this inquiry work, right? So we don't want people to feel that they have to have the students create inquiry questions and choose all the texts right at the beginning. So we provide some scaffolds in those vignettes. And then the last part of the book is where we talk about assessing inquiry. Because schools and teachers and students always want to know, how do we assess this, right? How do we assess this? And so we give a lot of different ideas, including a reflection, essays, Socratic seminars, a text set review blog post, podcasts, social media accounts, a gallery, letters or emails, or planning or assisting with an event. So what we want students to do is, just as the questions are really authentic and meaningful and relate to their lives as 6th through 12th graders, but also more importantly, hopefully relate to their lives as human beings beyond the classroom, we also wanted the assessments to make sense with that too, right? So ways that they can reflect on how their answer to that question changed or evolved over time throughout engaging in this inquiry unit, or how they used the knowledge that they gained from answering the question in order to enact change or do something in their community or think about presenting it to other audiences beyond the classroom. So that's really what we try to do in our InquiryBased book, is introduce the concept, give teachers practical ideas about essential questions and how to construct them, and then dive into real classroom uses with Sean's vignettes of how this looked in a real classroom, and then offer some ideas about assessment. So we're really excited about it. We had a book launch. I've had some colleagues say they're using it in their teacher preparation classes, which is a really great honor. And I too have used some of the ideas in my methods courses, where I ask my students to come up with an inquiry question around teaching and answer it for themselves. So I'm hopeful that it'll be useful to a lot of classroom teachers as they embark on inquiry work in their secondary English classrooms. And then the next book, which is not out yet, it's out in a couple of months, I believe, and that is our asset-based assessment book. And so when we think about assessment in the secondary English classroom, a lot of times students think about the standardized test and benchmark tests. And even when I teach the assessing literacy classes, our future teachers' ideas of assessment can be somewhat narrow in terms of it has to be a test, right? It has to have bubbles on it and has to be a test. And then they tell me that there are a lot of times there's a lot of anxieties around taking formal assessments, and they bring that with them to their work and teacher preparation classes, and then as they think forward to their lives as teachers. And so what we wanted to do in this book is, in some ways, I find the books kind of connect. So we left the inquiry book with assessments, and none of the assessments were take a multiple choice test or take the state standardized test to assess whether your students grew in their inquiry units. And so I think this book, to me, sort of is almost an extension of that assessment piece in that last book, where we offer teachers ideas about using students' identities and strengths and choices in the ways that they're assessed, right? So we wanted a way to share how teachers and students can engage in meaningful assessments where students can use their strengths and identities and have agency as they show what they know, right? And so we articulate what we believe asset-based assessment is, and that is assessment in which students feel valued and where they can show their learning in ways that make sense for them. And we wanted to share with practicing teachers in a very practical way, again, how assessment can honor students' literacies and choice. So one of the things that we know from the research about literacy is that when you look at students' home literacies and school literacies, sometimes there can be a big discrepancy, right? So sometimes teachers want to say, well, students aren't reading or students aren't writing. And sometimes even students themselves think, I'm not a real writer. I don't like to write. I don't like to read. I'm not a reader. I'm not a writer. But then when you begin to ask students, and this is from Lee Hall's work, about, well, what do they do outside of school, right? What do they do outside of the classroom? Then you find out, oh, they read graphic novels, or they listen to podcasts, or they like to write poetry in the side. These are all things that we didn't know until we ask and find out. And so one of the things that I believe is really important with asset-based literacy assessment is that you're allowing students' interests and literacy practices from outside of the classroom to come into the classroom, which I think is a net positive, right? And so one of the things that we do in the book is we also offer vignettes about the ways in which asset-based assessments looked. And so Sean talks about having students compose multimodal responses, creating podcasts, writing proposals for real audiences, composing websites, writing poems, creating public service announcements, composing infographics about word roots, and writing social media posts. So all of these types of assessments may look very differently than when we think of assessment traditionally, but all of them enable students and teachers to sort of see growth and also respond to content and curricular standards, just in ways that may not look as traditional as what comes to mind when we think about assessment. We also provide teachers rationale for why asset-based literacy assessment is important. And one of our chapters is also, how to articulate this to other stakeholders, right? So how to articulate the importance and the value of asset-based literacy instruction to your principal, for example, or to your grade level team, or to parents, or to students, or to colleagues who may think, what are you doing? And so one of the things we talk about is asset-based literacy assessment allows us to provide feedback at the most appropriate time. So a lot of these assessment exemplars that we offer are process-based. And so teachers and students can dialogue during the creation of these artifacts. And that makes assessment more meaningful instead of at the very end, right? I always tell my students, when I was teaching high school, we did the famous research paper, and I locked myself in Barnes and Noble one night, and I graded all these papers with beautifully colored pens, and I was so proud of myself. And then on Monday morning, with a big smile on my face, I returned all the papers, and some student threw his paper in the trash can. And at first I was very angry at that student, the audacity of him to do that. But over the years, I've really thought back, well, the assessment didn't make sense for him because the feedback came after he was done. So I changed my practice and started to give more feedback during the process. But also I think what this book does too is help teachers see that feedback during the process is really meaningful for students and for teachers. It also may help lessen students' anxieties, right? In the book, we do not say that standardized tests do not have a place. We just say that this is a complementary activity and way to assess students. We also think that asset-based assessment attends to students' roles in learning and assessment practices in the way that it privileges their voices and honors their identities. It also allows teachers to meet interdisciplinary standards. A lot of times teachers can be reticent to try something new because they feel a lot of pressure to meet curriculum standards, right? Well, it says I have to do 1.A579, and how does creating a podcast help me with that? But one of the things we do in our book is really share how these asset-based assessments blend very nicely with the standards for which teachers and students are responsible. So we do try to make sure that in both of the books, that what we're saying isn't just this ideal, but that it can really help teachers and students meet those standards. And then we also think, I think in both of these books, in the InquiryBased books and the asset-based assessment book, we really try to make an argument that this way of instructing in the secondary English classroom prepares students for life beyond the English classroom, right? Sean and I both know that not all of the students in secondary English classes want to be English education professors. They don't want to be English professors, but they will be humans, and they will have to wrestle with questions and big questions in life that are really important. And they may have to be able to produce their thinking in multiple ways in the workplace. And so I really think that both of these titles really get at you know, what happens beyond the English classroom, and trying to help teachers in a practical way help their students not only to exist in their classrooms, but to exist in real life as humans who think and react and compose and create.
Still on mute there. Katie, that was absolutely awesome. Yeah, it's very inspiring how you're kind of looking at teaching in this different lens a little bit. And I for one, especially as a student who struggled with math much more than I did with reading, I just appreciate this approach here. And I know I'm not saying all the technical terms as somebody who doesn't work in education, but I just really appreciate the way you're viewing teaching in this way. So if you wouldn't mind, I jotted down a couple questions for you. I think my first one. So when we're talking about the inquiry-based learning, you mentioned really examining what is a dividend, what is a metaphor, as opposed to just kind of being told what those things are, really thinking about it a little more deeply. So in your mind, is this a newer way to think about things? Yeah, I guess that's my question. Is it a lot newer, or has this existed before in some ways, just not on a large scale?
Yeah, that's a good question. And certainly nothing against dividends and metaphors. I just want students and teachers to sort of think about big picture questions that matter once we're out in the world and we're, you know, humans in this crazy world, you know, things that we're going to return to over and over again. And so to answer a question about whether or not this inquiry-based approach is new, I don't think it's new. But at the same time, I think it feels new to a lot of teachers.
Sure.
Because when I was in my teacher preparation program, we talked about creating units around themes, right? So, you know, these big ideas. And so when Sean approached me for this book, one of the things that came to mind was, you know, that's sort of how I was encouraged to teach literature and writing, is around these big ideas, right? So I don't know that it's totally new. I think it feels new and maybe different because of the context where many, not all, but many teachers feel really under the pressure of standards.
Yes.
And
Sure.
under the pressure of scripted curriculum and expectations of when a principal walks into a classroom, if you're teaching ninth grade, Caitlin, and I'm teaching ninth grade, by golly, we need to be reading, you know, the Scarlet Letter and be on the same chapter, or something gone totally wrong in the world. And so I think that this looks a lot different, but I can't say that it's brand new, but I think it feels a lot different than some of the certainly students that, you know, I teach in my classes have experienced.
Absolutely. And Katie, can you talk to a little bit to us about what kind of research went into the development of the inquiry-based? And I have some questions about the asset-based, but what kind of research did you have to conduct for the inquiry-based book that you did with Sean?
Yeah, so certainly we reread the literature on inquiry-based. We read a lot about, you know, what is an essential question, what are the qualities of an essential question. This was not so much a research study where we were going out and researching and looking at the effects of inquiry-based instruction on test scores or students' motivation or anything like that. But there was a lot of sort of reading at the beginning about you know, we read a lot of the position statements from the National Council of Teachers of English. And we read a lot about, you know, inquiry in general and what is an essential question. And so there was a lot of that kind of in the early part of both the creation of the book and the book itself, sort of setting the foundation based on other writings in the field around sort of the major areas. And the same thing would be true, Caitlin, for the asset-based book. Again, it wasn't sort of a research study per se, but still having to look in and thinking about what professional organizations are saying about assessment, but also contemporary thinkers about assessment in, you know, secondary English in particular, and using that to sort of set the foundation for then where Sean goes in and practice and enacts it in order to tell those vignettes.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. Now, looking at more of the asset-based, I had to tell you, Katie, it reminded me a lot of like what we do as professionals with like the Clifton Strengths Finder. Like you're looking at your, again, I know that's probably like not as technical, but it just reminds me of you're taking the student and looking at what they bring to the proverbial table. I hate to use a trade, but what they bring to the table and what they value most. So can you talk to me a little bit? Have you experienced that in your role as a teacher, not necessarily a professor, but when you were in Virginia and you said Chapel Hill teaching, did you experience some of that where you were asking students, okay, what do you like? So you say you're not good at reading, like what do you like outside of this, or what do you do for fun?
Yeah. Well, I think just in general, and I think I talk about it in the asset-based book, is, I was teaching on the Outer Banks of North Carolina and should have gone to the beach much more. And but when you work in vacation places, it's your job,
Sure.
And my husband and I still think we didn't hardly go to the beach. And so I was teaching there. And so just a real small example, I used a lot of surfing references. Many of my students, they would surf. And so certainly you don't want to be stereotypical that every kid on the beach surfs, and you have to be careful that you don't make sort of these paintbrush strokes about individuals and communities. But so many of them surfed. And so just moves like that, because the students and you hear what they're talking about. And I don't think that's a new idea. I mean, using, what your students are into and sort of incorporating that. And so just moves like that, I think, are the beginnings of this sort of asset-based. And in my literacy assessment course, we talk a lot about student inventories, where you're asking students to sort of think about and share with you, what are they interested in? Do they like reading? Do they like writing? And there's different ones depending on what grade levels. And my students really enjoy learning about, ways to figure out things and traits and identities of their students, because we can bring that into the literature classroom.
Sure. Absolutely, Katie. Well, Katie, that was fantastic. I can't thank you enough for joining us. I'm excited about your next book that's going to be coming out in a couple months here. And Katie kind of gave an introduction to the Blue Jay Reconnect, and I kind of urge our alumni out there too, if you're interested. I do feel, Katie, just to give you an idea, all my roommates in college were teachers, and I remember going through with them when they had their student teaching for an entire semester. So I do think, I think that your Blue Jay Reconnect's an awesome program for teachers out there. And Katie, they also meet with students, or part of that as well?
It's for alumni.
So it's solely alumni. Okay,
it's alumni.
Great.
Right.
That's what a great
tell me if you're interested, or an Etown grad who would really benefit from the program. And sometimes it's a small group, sometimes it's a bigger group, but I think just having that space and opportunity to share is really important.
Yep, Katie, I completely agree with you. Well, Dr. Caprino, thank you so much again for joining us today and allowing us an insider's view of your expertise and your work at the college. We are so grateful for your time, and we will be featuring more community members from the college in the months ahead. So don't forget to check back with us on etownalumni.com and on our various social media channels. Katie, thank you so much again.
Thanks, Caitlin.